At the end of June 1942, Anne Frank was still living a life that felt familiar and almost ordinary. Her days were full of school matters, visits from friends, and the small social experiences that felt important to a 13-year-old girl. She often felt busy, with little quiet time to sit and write, moving from one interaction to another without realizing how fragile that normality truly was. During this time, Anne became closer to a boy from her social circle. Their conversations grew more personal, and she observed how quickly emotions could form and change. She reflected on how people influence one another, sometimes believing a feeling is deeper than it truly is. To Anne, these moments were part of growing up, interesting, flattering at times, but not yet serious or lasting. There were days of boredom when plans fell apart, and moments of excitement when unexpected visits occurred. Simple things, like waiting by a window or receiving a phone call, could stir strong emotions. Yet restrictions were always present in the background. Curfews mattered, and being outside too late carried real danger. One evening, when Anne returned home later than expected, her father's anger was rooted not in strictness, but in fear. Jewish families could no longer move freely, and every hour outside after dark increased the risk. Anne promised to be more careful, quietly realizing that the rules of her world had changed. As July began, school results were announced. Anne was relieved and proud of her performance. Learning mattered to her, not only to satisfy her parents, but because she wanted to grow and improve. She compared herself to her older sister Margot, who seemed effortlessly brilliant, and thought deeply about her own ambitions. Her parents valued happiness more than grades, but Anne herself was determined not to fall behind. At home, life confirmed that something was shifting. Her father was no longer working regularly, and trusted friends had taken over responsibilities at the family business. During a walk, her father spoke seriously about the possibility of hiding. He explained that preparations had already been made, belongings quietly moved away over time. Anne did not fully understand what this meant, but the tone of his voice frightened her. He urged her to enjoy her carefree life while it still existed. Anne hoped those words would never become reality. Only days later, that fragile sense of normality disappeared. On a hot Sunday afternoon, a summons arrived from the authorities. At first, Anne believed it was meant for her father. Soon after, she learned it was for her sister Margot. Everyone understood what such notices usually meant. Fear filled the house, and there was no longer time to wait or question. Plans that had once been discussed cautiously were put into motion immediately. The family decided they would go into hiding at once, joined by others who would share their fate. The house grew quiet as reality settled in. Anne began packing without knowing where they were going. She chose what mattered most to her: her diary, school books, letters, and small personal items. In that moment, she understood that memories were more valuable than clothes. Helpers arrived quietly, removing necessities in small amounts to avoid suspicion. Shoes, clothes, and books disappeared into bags, and the house felt increasingly empty and strange. That night, exhausted and overwhelmed, Anne fell asleep quickly, knowing it would be the last time she slept in her own bed. Before dawn, the family prepared to leave. They dressed in layers, wearing as many clothes as possible so they would not need to carry luggage. The goal was simple: leave without attracting attention. Anne said goodbye only to her cat, unable to explain what was happening. The house was left exactly as it was: dishes on the table, beds unmade, to suggest an ordinary, hurried departure. When the door closed behind them, Anne stepped into the unknown. She did not yet know where they were going or how long they would be gone. She only knew that the life she had known until then was over, and that nothing would ever feel the same again. On the morning of July 9, 1942, the Frank family left their home under heavy rain. Anne walked beside her parents, each of them carrying school folders and shopping bags filled to their limits. They were dressed in layers, trying to look like ordinary people going about an ordinary day. As they moved through the streets, workers on their way to their jobs looked at them with sympathy. No one offered help or transportation. The yellow star sewn onto their clothes explained everything without words. Only after they were already walking did Anne's parents begin explaining the full plan. For months they had quietly prepared for this moment, moving food, belongings, and essentials little by little. The original plan had been to disappear later in July, but Margot's summons forced them to act sooner. The hiding place was located inside the same building where Anne's father had once worked. A small group of trusted people knew they were coming. Others, including warehouse workers, were intentionally kept unaware. The building itself appeared ordinary from the outside. At street level, it housed a warehouse. A narrow hallway led to offices used during the day by employees who continued their work as usual. Beyond these visible spaces, hidden behind an unremarkable door, was the place that would become known as the Secret Annex. Behind that door, steep stairs led upward into a concealed living space that no passerby would ever imagine existed. Inside the annex were several small rooms, narrow corridors, and steep staircases connecting different levels. There was a shared living area, bedrooms improvised from tight spaces, a small bathroom, and a kitchen that would serve multiple purposes. Though cramped and imperfect, it offered something invaluable: the chance to remain unseen. When Anne and her parents arrived, Margot was already there, having traveled ahead by bicycle. The annex was overflowing with boxes and supplies that had been sent in advance. Beds were buried beneath belongings, and every corner was filled. Exhausted and emotionally drained, Anne's mother and sister collapsed onto the beds. Anne and her father immediately began unpacking, cleaning, hammering, and organizing. They worked all day without warm food, barely noticing their hunger. Over the following days, the work continued. Floors were scrubbed, blackout systems improved, and food rations collected by helpers. Anne hardly had time to process what had happened. Only after the immediate chaos passed did the reality settle in. Her old life was gone, replaced by silence, secrecy, and confinement. At night, the sound of a nearby church clock echoed through the annex. While others found it unsettling, Anne grew fond of it. The sound became familiar, almost comforting, like a reminder that time was still moving forward. She struggled to describe how it felt to disappear from the world. The annex did not feel like home, but neither did she hate it. To her, it felt like living in a strange boarding house, detached from reality. The rooms were bare at first, but Anne's father had arranged for her postcards and pictures to be sent ahead. Together, they covered the walls, transforming the space into something warmer and more personal. Curtains were improvised from mismatched fabric to block all light from escaping. Even the smallest noise felt dangerous. Coughing, footsteps, and whispered conversations had to be controlled, especially during working hours in the warehouse below. Anne lived with constant fear of discovery. The silence during afternoons and nights weighed heavily on her. She longed for company, for voices, for any sound that made the space feel alive. She worried endlessly about being found and executed, a fear that never fully left her thoughts. A few days later, another family joined them in hiding. The Van Dans arrived earlier than planned due to increasing arrests in the city. Along with them came their teenage son and their cat. With their arrival, the annex grew more crowded, but also less lonely. Meals were now shared, routines established, and the group slowly began functioning as a single household. The newcomers brought news from the outside world, rumors, guesses, and strange stories about what people believed had happened to the Frank family. Some thought they had fled the country, others imagined secret rescues or military involvement. Anne found it unsettling, yet strangely amusing how easily reality became distorted once they had vanished. Despite moments of humor, the tension never fully disappeared. Every sound, every movement, every passing day carried risk. Still, Anne continued observing, thinking, and writing, trying to understand her new life and the uncertain future ahead.